Well, hi guys, welcome to this Moneycontrol live stream. We are here to talk about the big development that took place over the weekend. Bold from the blue, Uday Kotak resigning as the MD and CEO of Kotak Bank 4 months ahead of his tenure ending in December. But let's talk about what this really means for the bank going forward, the shareholders and the stock at large. So let me bring on board our senior markets editor N. Mahalakshmi to put things into perspective as to what this really means and what would be the way forward when it comes to succession, who are the contenders and the likes. Hi ML, thanks a lot for joining in. First of all, it was a bolt out of the blue. Nobody was expecting Mr. Kotak to resign 4 months ahead of his tenure ends in December. But given the fact that 4 months in the life of an organization spanning 38 years, it's negligible. But still, it's an illustrious career cut short by regulations, right? Would you say that his appointment as a non-executive director is something that comes as a positive surprise?
Well, I mean, there is no surprise at all. I think with respect to his exit, the market has been clearly discounting that. The fact that he could become non-executive chairman was also, widely known. There is no objection that RBI has raised so far. So I don't think from a market perspective, he's going away, like you rightly said. 4 months in advance makes so much of a difference. But obviously, there is a little mystery around it, right? Why, you could have gone 4 months later. It wouldn't have made too much of a difference. Even if you have a personal reason, he cited his son's marriage and all of that. If you've stayed on for so long, another 3 months won't harm. You can go on leave for a month and your team will take care of it. So there is certainly a certain
surprise
mystery in terms of why would he go 4 months in advance. But largely it doesn't change anything because he could have been executive, continued as non-executive director earlier also. And that seems, I think that is how it might pan out. And his departure anyway, the market has been discounting for a while now. So no surprise, but there is a tinge of mystery because of this early exit.
Right, ML, two names, extra large boots to fill, two names doing the rounds, KVS Manian and Shanti Ekambaram. Both are likely insiders, but are there any possibilities of an outsider coming in?
Well, logically, if you see, a bank is all about creating a culture. Bank is all about the culture of an. I mean, it can be said of all organizations, but in banks particularly, it is very important to understand what is the culture and the DNA of the organization, right? So if you just go back in history and look at, say, an ICICI bank versus a HDFC bank, they were chalk and cheese, in the first decade of 2000s. If you see, ICICI was absolutely this go-go growth kind of company, kind of bank. HDFC, on the contrary, was always a very, very poised, very measured growth, profitable growth, conservative. And you could say from one quarter to another quarter, it would be just a few decimal points here and there. It will be, 30%, and then and then it came down to 25% and 20%. But that consistency was, and that was built into their culture. And this contrast really became stark in 2008 when there was such a huge, the financial crisis happened and ICICI's leverage and other exposures really unraveled and they had to go into contraction mode. HDFC, on the contrary, could continue to drive business and continuously grow. So why am I talking about this? Because it is about culture in the end for banks. So the question of insider versus outsider really stems from that. Do you believe that the culture of the organization was not about only one person, but it is pervaded into the organization, into the way the top management thinks? Is it in the DNA? I think in Kotak, if you look at the top management team right now, and I think the next layer also has kind of absorbed or embedded exactly the same values that has been created by the top layer. It is really hardwired in their DNA to be prudent, not go after things that particularly look attractive but risky, conservatism, the ability to say no to a certain business because it is risky or it is too good to be true, all of which were values that Uday Kotak brought to the table, but he made sure that his A team absorbed that, and the next layer absorbs that. Now, if you believe that is truly something that needs to be preserved, that is the real competitive advantage for Kotak, then there is reason to believe that it should be carried forward by somebody who's an insider who can carry through these values.
Right.
So I don't know why anybody would think of an outsider, except that the conventional logic is that you don't want, because this is to do with public money, you don't want perpetuating of a certain family or a promoter, perpetuating their tenure in the organization. So that's the conventional logic that the regulators might also want to go with. But if you really look at it in terms of what the management has demonstrated, what has worked in favor of the bank, there is nothing to challenge that or challenge or question why an insider should take the top job. So,
Right.
so it's I think the only thing that probably will goes against Kotak and thinking of an outsider is because Uday Kotak himself has ruffled a few feathers. Perhaps
Exactly.
in
That is what I was
RBI,
coming to.
he dragged them to court.
Yeah.
It's, for the first time ever in the history of Indian banking, it happened. So,
Which is why, do you think the street will be looking forward to somebody who can start afresh with the regulator and perhaps pursue a more aggressive growth path going forward? Or do you think the street would like somebody like Uday Kotak to be a little measured when it comes to taking risk and while pursuing a growth path?
It's hard to say that, Nandita, because in the go-go years, again you go back in history, whether in India or in the US, the easiest thing to do in the banking business is to dole out money. The easiest thing to do is to accelerate your growth. But how do you pursue that growth? Is it profitable? Is it going to, because decisions that you make in banking today are going to unravel 8-10 years down the line. So everybody, all of these banks that saw phenomenal growth during the 2003 to 2008 credit cycle, that took another 10 years to unravel. That is one of the reasons why all the public sector banks got into trouble, why ICICI Bank, Axis Bank, many of the banks which were really unbridled with their corporate credit, they all got into trouble for various reasons. But primarily because there was a lot of mispricing of assets, and of course there were a lot of policy hiccups, etc., which also didn't work in favor of those assets. But at the core really is about your decision making about a credit, right? And therefore today, if anybody says that we'll be happy to see a higher accelerated growth in Kotak, it's all about, when you buy into a bank, you have to buy into the culture and the philosophy and what they deliver. And I think the conventional investors in Kotak would much rather like the fact that it remains a prudent, profitable bank with a fairly good ROE and don't see some kind of a erosion because you took missteps today. But there might also be a whole bunch of other investors, because now in our banking sector, in our corporate sector, there is an upturn in credit cycle. There is a capex cycle that is panning out. There is an investment cycle that is upcoming. You might want the bank to shed its conservatism and embrace growth. That could bring in new set of investors for sure. But again, it is all about setting out what you wish to do, what is your philosophy, and then communicating that equally effectively to your shareholders so that there is no expectation mismatch.
Right, there is a 3-year cool-off period, that's what the regulations say. But is there any slight chance of Uday Kotak returning as the CEO in sometime in the future?
I wouldn't hazard a guess in terms of whether he could come back or not. But look at, the history of all promoters in India, okay? Now, strictly, RBI wouldn't want us to think of, or think of Uday Kotak as a promoter. He's an investor. That's how we would want to perceive a promoter in a bank. But look at, everybody else, whether you look at Ratan Tata or you look at Narayana Murthy or any big succession changes that have happened. You don't go out with an intent to come back. But if something goes wrong, for example, the next management, whether it is an insider, it's very highly unlikely that an insider will change course or change the DNA of the organization. It's possible that if an outsider comes and he sees that, he becomes over aggressive with respect to growth, it's not in sync with his perception of what is right or wrong. He also obviously has a very acute sense of risk, and he's been extremely risk averse. So if he sees that there could be substantial damage to, after all, his wealth is all embedded here, right? So if he sees any substantial threat to wealth creation or any possibility of wealth erosion, I'm very sure that at some point in time he would want to push back and say, hey, what's happening here? In what form would he come back? Would he just exercise his right as a shareholder to push through his views, or how he will play it? That only time will tell. But we have to keep room for all these things in future.
Right, as Anand Mahindra also mentioned, it's not an end to his story, because you can't say that he's hung up his boots, given the fact that his career has come, career at Kotak Bank came to an end because of regulations and not because of his own will. But let's talk about the stock price as well. We've seen the stock been fairly under pressure ever since, the tussle with the regulator broke out. 2020 onwards, stock hasn't really done well. Over the last year as well, it has lagged its peers like ICICI and HDFC Bank. I think negative returns of 8% over the last 1 year thereabouts. But for the stock per se, do you think there is room for a more correction going forward? Because if you look at the valuations also, it's still a little expensive compared to its peers, right? So is there room for valuation going downwards, maybe the stock becoming more attractive from here on, given the uncertainty over succession?
No, I don't think so. I think these succession, these succession issues are not something that goes away in just one day. The market has of course anticipated this for quite some time, and that explains the underperformance so far. But usually when an iconic leader goes away, right, it is not that the next guy is going to come and change things overnight and it's going to be on another trajectory altogether. The market will also warm up to the idea of the new candidate and see, which way is this headed. So people are not going to, just because he is out and it is done, money is not going to pour in, nor is money going to pour out, because a lot of it has been getting discounted over the past 1 year. But if you just look at it fundamentally, think about this, Nandita. Today it is at 2.8 times or 2.7 times, price to adjusted book. And HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank will be 2.3 times, 2.4 times adjusted book. It is still expensive compared to others, but what was it in the past? Kotak Bank at times has traded at 6 times book, 5.5 times book. So it's a big come down, and the market valued that because of two reasons. One is, the past decade was really bad for banks, right? Overall, everybody who had a bigger portion of their book into corporates, infrastructure, all of that, they went through a lot of cleanup acts. So there was no growth, there was contraction in balance sheet, there were quarter after quarter there was some kind of provisioning, and which took away from earnings. Kotak Bank and HDFC Bank were the only quality banks that really stood out in that era. So obviously anybody who wanted exposure to banks was latching on to these quality stocks. Now that environment has changed. So everybody is looking like quality right now, because everybody has low leverage, everybody has capital, everybody has clean balance sheets, and everybody is looking at growth ahead, right? So the environment today also does not make a very strong relative case for Kotak, except for the fact that I said, as a long-term, banking potential, banking is about DNA and culture, and I think the market will distinguish between good bank and a bad bank, and good lending practices and bad lending practices, profitable growth versus sheer growth. These distinctions will become more and more clear as we move into the credit cycle. And but if you ask me, in the very short run, I don't see any dramatic shifts either way.
Right, brokerages have also maintained their view on the stock. So what should shareholders really be watching out for in the coming say 6 to 7 months now? I mean, what's the way forward for the stock?
I think if you are I would, we are not allowed to recommend stocks and stuff like that, but I'm just say that, like, let's just lay all the cards on the table and see what is it fundamentally, how is the bank looking. It is a good bank. It has a great franchise. It's taken on, Goldman Sachs, for God's sake. It has an ROE of 14%. Now I think some of the other banks also have 16-17% ROE. It has high margins. It has the highest capital adequacy. So I don't see anything wrong in the bank, plus the fact that they have this management culture of prudent and profitable growth. So that's a clear positive. But how this management transition will pan out, you have to still wait and watch. And if you believe, and I think everybody in their right mind should believe that banking has to be about institution. It cannot be just about one leader. Although there is no questioning the fact that Uday Kotak was a big part of Kotak, and therefore if the markets corrected, it is not unusual, because how he would, I am told by some of his colleagues that up until a few years ago, even a 2 lakh credit, he would run through it, So for such a large bank, Uday Kotak was an extreme micromanager. So that is also because he was absolutely paranoid about, going bankrupt in the early days, because he belonged to that time when 99% of the NBFCs fell and he was the survivor. So obviously his survival instinct is all about conservation or preservation of capital, and that's how he brought this franchise to this level. For a short-term shareholder, for investor perspective, I don't think we should be counting on any big gains, and I don't think from a downside perspective there is too much more to go, because you're already corrected a lot. Yeah, that's that.
Well, so we have laid all the cards on the table, and of course we'll see how this succession or transition takes place at Kotak Mahindra Bank. Of course, Dipak Gupta will stay on till the 31st of December, and then later on, post RBI approval, it will be decided as to who will step into the extra large shoes that's left behind by Uday Kotak. With that, it's a wrap on this Moneycontrol live session. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and ML, thanks a lot for joining in and putting things into perspective for us and for all the viewers out there. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Stay tuned to Moneycontrol for all your other news and updates.
How do world leaders view India?
I've long believed that the relationship between the United States and India is will be one of the defining relationships of the 21st century.
The bright spot of the global economy.
The growth rate for India, which is 6.8 in 2022. Let's not forget, this is one of the bright spots in the global economy right now, such a high growth rate.
The potential of India is enormous, and you have now a reformer, a radical reformer, who has the ability to transform it.
On the verge of a big transformation.
इस अमृत काल में हमारे संकल्पों की सिद्धि हमें आजादी के 100 वर्ष तक ले जाएगी.
A magnet for investment.
I'm actually incredibly excited about the future of India. I think India has more promise than any large country in the world.
The world is bullish on India. Moneycontrol is bullish on India. Join the campaign. Tweet to us with hashtag MC Bullish on India.